Welcome to the Good News Spectacular. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. Each week, the Good News Spectacular show shares an interesting story with you in the journey we call life, from birth to death and beyond. Sometimes a journey is filled with joy and triumph, but other times it is filled with fear, pain, and sorrow. This week's show will have a mixture of both. When we return from break, we're going to visit with former atheist turned pastor Howard Storm, who had a near-death experience and experienced both ends of the spectrum in the journey we call life. You do not want to miss the episode of the Good News Spectacular. See you right after the break. Welcome to the Good News Spectacular. I'm Doug Thompson. Today we're following up on our first show was, of course, on near-death experience. This time on this show we've got Howard Storm. And Howard, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And when we talk about a near-death experience, you probably had one of the most colossal near-death experiences that I can think of. Can you share that with the viewers, please?
Well, in 1985, I was taking a group of students around Europe on an art tour because I was an art professor at a university. And on June 1st, 1985, at 11 o'clock in the morning, I had a perforation of the small stomach, which means that a hole erupted in the wall of my small stomach and was sending the hydrochloric acid and digestive juices into my abdomen. It knocked me to the ground. An emergency doctor came to the hotel, called an ambulance. He knew what was wrong, told me I'd have surgery right away. I was sent to an emergency room, further examination. They knew exactly what was wrong, and they sent me over to a surgical hospital, but unfortunately, it was a Saturday, and socialized medicine being what it is, there was no surgeon at the surgical hospital to do any surgery, so I was parked in a room and left there without any medication or attention for 10 hours.
And Howard, you were out of this country too, even though you were a professor. You were an art professor at the time in the States. Am I correct?
Right. That's right.
And you were with a group overseas. You were in Paris at the time.
Yes.
And this medical situation you had was life and death.
Yeah, the doctors in the United States told me that I had a 5-hour life expectancy, that the situation was a lot like having a burst appendix. If you get to it in a few hours, it can be remedied. If it goes too long, it's going to be fatal.
Yeah, and this attack hit you at the hotel. You and your wife were together at the room, and this attack hit you, and then a doctor made an appearance at the hotel room. You were then transported to the hospital, but there wasn't staff on at the facility at the time who could address this issue.
That's right.
Okay. What happened next, Howard?
A nurse came into the room at 8:30 that night and said they were unable to find a doctor and they'd try and get one the next day. Well, when she said that, I had never been, the pain was unbelievable, and I had never been given any medication or anything. There was no treatment at all because there was no doctor. So when she told me that there was not going to be a doctor, I had known for hours that I was dying and was trying to stay alive because as I was an atheist and I believed that when you die, it's all over and that's all there is to it. I knew that with absolute certainty. I considered myself a highly intelligent, rational man. I was a professor. All of my friends believed the same way I did. And when she said that, she was giving me my death sentence. So I said my goodbyes to my wife and told her to tell my children and my parents goodbye. And she sat down in her chair and wept, and I closed my eyes and went unconscious. And then, to my complete surprise, I was wide awake, standing over my bed, and I felt actually more alive than I'd ever felt my entire life. All my senses were very heightened. I could see, hear, touch, feel, taste. Everything was very real to me, and my wife wouldn't respond to me trying to talk to her, nor the other man in the room, my roommate in the room, who was a very kind Frenchman, and I got very disturbed because in the bed that I had been in was a body that looked exactly like me, but I refused to believe it was me because I felt so alive. How could I be standing there looking at myself when there was this thing in the bed that looked like me? So I just refused.
Howard, did you
to believe
recognize
that was me.
that? Did you recognize that body in the bed as being you? You just refused to accept it?
Yes, exactly.
And did you, you of course could recognize your wife's there. Were you able to understand why she could not hear you? Did you realize
No,
you were out of
I
body?
assumed that she was mad at me for dying, and she was not going to talk to me because that's what she did when she was mad at me. She wouldn't talk to me, so I thought she was ignoring me. Of course, she didn't see me standing there or hear me yelling at her or anything.
I'm aware of that part of it. Howard, we got to take a break. That's amazing, but hold on. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Howard Storm. Welcome back to the Good News Spectacular. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. We're visiting with Howard Storm. Howard is starting to share with us the out-of-body experience he had. He was an art professor, and he was on trip with students. Him and his wife were in the hotel room. He had an attack to his body. It was very serious. He was transported to the hospital in Paris. There's no staff available. Howard was at that time an atheist, and he is in some kind of critical shape. And before we cut away on break, Howard was just describing that he is standing next to his body, recognizes his body, but refuses to understand or believe that other people in the room can't hear it. Howard, how in the world did a smart guy like you get to be an atheist?
Well, there were a number of factors. I went to church as a child back in the 50s and 60s. Basically, me and my sisters were kind of dressed up and dragged to church, but I liked the Sunday school part a lot. The church service didn't make much of sense to me as a child. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I did ask the pastor to baptize me when I was 12 years old because I wanted to be a part of that. My home life was getting worse. My father had gotten a new, very stressful job as a manager of the sales department for the company he worked for, and he was becoming very angry, was taking it out on the family all the time. So my father and I were becoming increasingly alienated, and when my sisters became teenagers, they decided they didn't want to go to church anymore. It was too boring, and I followed suit, and because of what was going on at home, I was looking for answers and reading philosophy and got interested in things like existentialism. And then when I went to college at the age of 17 and had a philosophy professor my first semester of college who was a atheist, and he just convinced me of where I was already going, that only very silly people believed in God or anything, that all that stuff was just a fairy tale, and that intelligent people look down on all that stuff as just fantasy.
Yeah, and that's a common story that I hear in that situation, Howard, is as you were going through this ordeal in the hospital as an atheist, what did you think was going to happen with the biological unit upon its death? What did you think would just happen? You'd just be gone and that would be it?
Yeah, I knew for certain that when you died, it was over. I'd even heard of near-death experience and had decided, along with my friends and I had discussed it, and decided that maybe when you died, there was some kind of like euphoric thing that happened in the brain to deal with the trauma of dying, to sort of ease the total cessation of life. But I certainly didn't believe that there was anything such as a soul or that consciousness would continue after you died.
Yeah. Well, continue with your story then, because before I pulled you away from it, you were describing that you were standing by the hospital bed, your wife couldn't hear you, wouldn't respond to you. You said that when she was mad at you, that was consistent, so that wasn't a total shock to you. But when did you realize that you were having an out-of-body experience and that there was life after the biological function?
Well, before I came to that realization, I heard people calling me from outside the room, so I went over to the doorway of the room, and they told me that they'd been waiting for me, and I said, I'm very sick, I need to have surgery, and they said they knew all about me and that I had to hurry up and come with them. So I thought that they were hospital people that were going to walk me to my surgery. The pain that I'd had, which was completely overwhelming, I didn't have any pain anymore, so I was really happy about that. And so I left the room and joined the people out in the dark hallway, thinking that we were going to walk to the operating room. And we walked, and that walk went on for time without any measure. And I became increasingly aware that these people were not good people, that they were getting very hostile, and I told them that I wasn't going to go any further with them, except that we were in complete darkness now. We had walked into pitch dark, and I didn't know which way to go, and they started to push and pull at me, and I fought back with them, and the more that I fought with them, the more they were engaged in taking me apart bit by bit. If there were a lot of these people, I don't know how many because it was dark, but maybe hundreds or more. And they were scratching and biting and tearing, and it hurt like crazy. And I was trying to defend myself, and of course I was going to lose because there were so many of them and one of me. And eventually, they did all kinds of horrible things to demean me, torment me, and
cursing you and demeaning you with their words and their actions.
Oh, their actions, yeah. I mean, they were all over me, physically. And so I was on the floor of that place, wherever it was, and I heard my voice say to me, pray to God, and I thought, I don't know how to pray to God. I don't pray to God. And the voice said, pray to God, and I thought, I don't even know how to pray. How could I pray? And the voice said, pray to God, and I thought, when I was a kid, I had prayed. When I was when I'd gone to church, we'd learned prayers, and I was trying to remember prayers, and it was all a big muddle in my mind with everything that I'd memorized, with the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem and Shakespeare and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and I'm trying to go through all this stuff, trying to find a prayer, and I come up with a few words, and with that, the people around me were extremely angry, and they were saying in very obscene language that there is no God, nobody can hear you, and we're going to make it much worse for you now. But I realized that by mentioning God, it drove them back away from me. They couldn't bear hearing God mentioned, and so that encouraged me to pray more.
And is that when they withdrew from you, Howard, when you would use the Lord's name?
Yep.
And Howard, I got to take a little break. We're going to come right back after this break, and I want to pick it up right from there, Howard. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Good News Spectacular. I'm visiting with Howard Storm. He's relating the near-death experience. Howard, when we last talked about this, you were calling out on the Lord's name, and when you would do so, these creatures would withdraw from you. What happened after that, Howard?
Eventually, I had driven them away so that I couldn't hear them or sense them near me anymore, and so I was left there to go over to think about what had happened to me, and I didn't have any religious understanding at that time. So what I came to the conclusion is that people that had lived garbage lives went down the chute into the cesspool, and that is what happened to me, because I had, and I'm of course ashamed to admit it, but I had a sense that these people were people that had lived the same kind of lives that I'd lived: selfish, manipulative, outwardly acting like nice people, but inwardly without really any real love or care for anybody except for those people that could serve your purposes. And I felt that what had happened to me was what I deserved with my life. It took me a long time to come to that conclusion. I mean, this didn't just, I'm talking about a lot of thinking about my life and how I'd failed as a husband and a father and a son to my parents, etc. So I'm lying there in a completely hopeless situation when a memory, a very vivid memory of me as a small child sitting in a Sunday school classroom singing "Jesus Loves Me" came to my mind. And with that memory also came a distant but very strong feeling of being a child and believing in this man, Jesus, who cared about me. And when I was a child, I had prayed to him and asked him for help and protection. And I desperately wanted him to care about me, not knowing whether he would or if he could or even if it was real, but I wanted what I'd believed as a little kid, so I called out into the darkness, "Jesus, please save me." And when I did that, a light appeared in the darkness and very rapidly got extremely bright and came over me, and his hands and arms emerged from this brilliant white light and reached down and touched me. And when he touched me, all the gore and dismemberment that I was disappeared, and I became whole. And he picked me up and put his arms around me and held me to him, and I felt a love that is unlike any kind of love that we know in this world, so much greater and more powerful. And so I had my arms around him, holding him, and his arms around me, loving me, and I wept. And we started to leave that place by just going directly upward. And I was, of course, completely overwhelmed with his love and that we were moving out of that place of darkness. And then I realized that we were moving towards a huge world of light from the darkness. And I thought to myself, he's made a terrible mistake. I'm garbage. I don't belong here. And with that, we stopped moving, and he spoke directly into my mind for the first time, and he said, "We don't make mistakes. You do belong here." And my next thought was, "Do you know what I'm thinking?" And he said, to my mind, he said, "I know what you're thinking. I know every thought you've ever had." And then I went, "Oh, that's really scary, because I've had lots of things that I wish you didn't know." He said, "Well," he said, "I know you." And in his love and in his words, I realized that in spite of everything that I had done in my life, which I'd done all kinds of terrible things, in some way, shape, or form had broken all the commandments, I realized that he loved me. And then he said that he wanted to call some friends over who were going to show me my life, and he called out, and some people that are referred to as angels came, and they proceeded to show me my whole life from when I was born up to that present time, showing me how I had interacted with people, how I had affected them. And as we progressed from my childhood into my adolescence, things began to go badly, and Jesus and the angels expressed their great displeasure with what I was doing with my life. But it's important for me to say that I knew that Jesus still loved me, even though he despised what I was doing with my life.
And you, as I read on the website that you have, there was also great pleasure taken by Jesus and the host of angels that were around him when your relationships were strong and solid, when you showed love.
Right.
That was a part of it, and that was, of course, a key of what I took out of reading your...
So the most important thing that I realized from that life review that he gave me was that I had been, and I think I can say that I'm certainly not unique, and this would be true for everyone, that we are here to love one another. and that I had completely, by being selfish, non-believer in God, non-believer in Jesus, I completely failed what God had created me for in the first place, and that's why I had that horrible experience in the cesspool. And he asked me if I had any questions, and I said that I had a million questions, and he said, ask whatever you want. So we proceeded to have a wonderful question and answer period where he answered everything that I could think of to ask at that time. He answered everything carefully and clearly, and a lot of times I don't know whether we went to the places or whether it just seemed like that, but I would ask him historical questions, and we would go back and see things that had happened, and talked about the future, and we went into the future. A lot of my questions were about myself, because that's, of course, what I was most interested in.
Right.
And he just completely gave me a new understanding of the world and my life and everything around it. And so when I exhausted all of my questions, I said to him, I want to go to heaven. And because I'd asked him a lot of questions about heaven, and he'd shown me lots of things about heaven. And he said, you're not ready for heaven. You've got to go back to the world and live the life that you were created to live in the first place. And I argued with him to try and persuade him to let me go to heaven, and he defeated all my arguments with better arguments, his own better arguments about that, why I needed to come back to this world. So when he finally convinced me that it was best for me to come back, I agreed to come back. And when I did that, I was back in the bed, back in that body, back in the pain, and the nurse who had been in the room a little while earlier came back in the room and said, the doctors arrived at the hospital and we're going to prepare you for the surgery. And I had the surgery at 10 o'clock that night.
Yeah, and ultimately I read the portion on the website where you went back to the States, and of course we're having this conversation, but I want to go into some other things. Let me do something here for the network part. We are way past our break period. This show is so good with Howard. We're going to do it nearly commercial free. So Howard and I are going to keep going. There isn't any break. Network, you'll just have to adjust to what we've just done here. Howard, after you got back, some point in time you made some life-changing decisions in your own career. What did you do?
After I came back, I knew that I was going to have to change everything about myself, and that's not the easiest thing in the world to do, because, I mean, where do you begin? I mean, and so I was making changes. Some of the things that changes I made were not successful. Like I, for a while, imagined myself to be a holy man, and that didn't go over too well with my family. I went to a monastery and tried to join a monastery, and they wouldn't have me because I was married and had a family. And they said, "Go back and take care of your family." Anyways, I was at the university and came and also started going to church, and I felt just madly in love with the church because I was contrasting the truth of what was being said at the church and what people were striving to achieve in the church, which is a closer relationship with God and with Jesus. And in the university, I saw so much deception and so many people being literally lied to and driven away from the church and away from God.
And I want to visit about the university time that you had, not specific to any university, but in generalities. But I want to do that on the next show. Howard, ultimately you became a pastor, didn't you?
Yeah, I decided after I went through a lay ministry program at my church, which was 3 years, and when I completed that, I decided that God was calling me to full-time ministry. So I stayed at the university and went to seminary at night and started serving churches as a student pastor, and resigned my tenured position at the university and became a full-time pastor and served churches for the next 22 years.
Wow. And now you're retired. You and your wife live, is it in Kentucky?
Yes,
Okay.
Northern Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I think you told me before we came on air, I'm like many retired people, I'm busier now than what I was when I was still working full-time.
That's right.
And you wrote a book, Howard. What's the book? What's the name of the book?
I wrote a book about my experience called My Descent into Death, and that book I wrote specifically to non-believers to try and convince them in a way that I thought they would hear it, because non-believers are very defensive, and they don't like to hear church language. So in that book, I wrote it to try and subtly appeal to their reason and their interest to get them to... it tells my experience, but trying to tell it in a voice that wouldn't turn them off and throw the book away.
All right, I understand, Howard.
Now I'm writing a new book talking about my spiritual life, but this one I'm writing it for believers, so I'm free to use Christian language.
Yeah, I understand it. Howard, we've got to wrap this show up. Folks, we have been enjoyed visiting with Howard Storm. Hope you've enjoyed Good News Spectacular. Till next time, see you later.